to see that. Okay, yeah, we're recording now, so go ahead, Kim Marie.
All right, everyone, welcome to tonight's webinar on Pluto Retrograde in Capricorn. As you can see in your opening slide, we're looking at Pluto Retrograde this year from April 16th to September 24th, 25th of 2015. Before we get started, I'm going to have a few housekeeping slides for you, so thank you for allowing me to do this and share a little bit about EAN with you. First of all, here at EAN, you can learn astrology with us in a variety of ways. We have a free weekly audio podcast that we do. You can find this on our website looking at the forecast drop-down menu, and that will take you directly to our audio podcast, our Astro Library, and also our multimedia course. Here's a little more information on our Astro Library. We have taken a dozen years worth of material in various forms by myself, Kim Marie, and other evolutionary astrologers, and we have gathered them into 3 different areas of understanding evolutionary astrology. You can see the 3 sections of the Astro Library on your screen. You can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. You can do this with individual sections, or you can do this with all 3 sections of the Astro Library all at once. Here's our multimedia course. We have 3 different segments to the multimedia course. We're just finishing up a sale on them, and Leroy reminded me that we had not taken the discounted price off. So if you are interested, we have all 3 segments discounted from $300 to $250, which you're looking at on this screen. In the $250 price is getting the actual materials shipped to you, meaning the materials binder with the transcript and the actual DVDs. We also have segments 1 and 2 completely online now, so everything that you would get physically, you can now access online from any internet-friendly device you might have, and we have the online segments on sale for $175 instead of the $200. And so if you are interested, you're welcome to go check those out and get yourself studying within the next few days. And so, again, tonight's class is going to be on Pluto Retrograde in Capricorn. We pretty much know by now that Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008. It's going to be in Capricorn through 2023-24. And so we are going to have 15 years of Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. And what we are looking at with its retrograde this year is the fact that we are actually going to get into the middle degrees of Pluto in Capricorn. As you can see from your screen here, it's going to go retrograde April 16th at 1533 Capricorn. So we have reached that halfway point of Pluto's 15-year transit. It's going to retrograde back into 12 degrees 58 minutes when it goes direct in September. Now, one of the things that I like to do here is to show you how Pluto, and this is true for Neptune and Pluto, Uranus to some degree, but how they will overlap if you take into consideration the shadow before the retrograde, when Pluto's actually moving from 1258 to 1533 Capricorn. Then it goes retrograde back to the 12, and this is the ending shadow when it's direct at 1258 up to when it passes 15 Capricorn 33 minutes again. If you look at this by date, you can see that this goes from December 26, 2014 all the way through January 15th, 2016. So we have pretty long shadows if we start to look at the amount of time that it takes Pluto to travel 3 times, direct, retrograde, direct, through Capricorn from 1258 to 1533. So we'll look at these dates some more as we go through some of our material here. But what I wanted you to just see is, again, the degrees that we're going to be traveling 3 times. December 26th through April 16th when it goes retrograde. Retrograde April 16th through September 24th, 25th. When it goes direct again, and then September 24th, 25th through January 15th. Those are the 3 dates that we are looking at here of Pluto moving through this 2.5 degrees of the zodiac during its retrograde cycle. Now here's a visual for you that I always put up with the retrograde planets. What happens when we look at any of the outer planets, which is Mars through Pluto? When they are retrograde, they are closest to Earth. The Earth is traveling between the Sun and the retrograde planet. And as Earth travels faster and overtakes that planet, as they're both revolving around the Sun, this is what creates the visual of the outer planet in the sky as a backdrop, appearing to stop, stand still, reverse itself in the heavens until it stops and turns direct and goes forward again. Here's a little bit of Pluto astronomy for you. Pluto takes 248 years to go around the Sun. It's so far out there that is also its revolution around the zodiac. If we averaged it out to a daily motion for Pluto, moving through the zodiac, it's 15 minutes. Here's the degree sign, seconds. Here's the degree sign. Here's the minutes. We're always used to a planet moving through a sign of the zodiac by degree and minute. Here's the seconds. 15 seconds is its mean motion on a daily basis. Now we are talking space, not time here. Pluto's annual retrograde cycle is 5 months. Pluto is retrograde 44% of the year. That 5 months is actually 160 days. And when Pluto slows down to turn retrograde, as it is right now, and when it slows down to turn direct again, it will appear to stand still in the sky for 7 days. It stands still a week when it's turning retrograde, and a week when it's getting ready to go direct again. Now, many of us are familiar, if we're students of evolutionary astrology, that in 2006, Pluto was demoted from planet to dwarf planet, and all the elementary school teachers had to change their science books. In EA, we kind of go with that saying, a rose by any other name smells the same. We're not so much interested in what astronomers classify the planets to be as we are the observe, correlate, interpret the archetype of energy represented by any heavenly body out there that we look at. Now, anything that exists beyond Neptune's orbit is called the Kuiper belt, I don't know how to pronounce it. Somebody can help me out here. But Pluto actually, again, Kuiper, oh jeez. Pluto, and now our new one, Eris. You aren't even there visually. You just spoke up. There's a joke with us of how Kim Marie can, jump at the slightest thing.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt. It is Kuiper belt, though.
Kuiper. Is my Pluto Virgo trauma coming up. Pluto's beyond Neptune. The new body, Eris, is beyond that. They exist in that Kuiper belt. And these objects are known to be made of rock and ice. Pluto itself is the 10th most massive body directly observed orbiting the Sun, in other words, so far. And Pluto's orbit is so elliptical, and it's at such an angle from the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path around the Earth. It's at such an angle, it's more extreme than the rest of the planets, that sometimes it will appear to go within the orbit of Neptune. And it last did that February 7th, 1979 through February 11th of 1999, 20-year time period, and we would have had Pluto transiting through the latter part of Libra all the way through Scorpio and then into early Sagittarius when it was doing this. Pluto is known to have 5 moons. Charon is the largest. It's just over half the diameter of Pluto. You see the others listed there. Pluto and Charon are sometimes called a binary system, or some Charon. Again, I don't know how to pronounce this one either, because the center, the barycenter between them, it's not like Pluto, it's not like Earth, where the moon orbits around Earth. Pluto and Charon orbit around each other, and the center between them is in the space between them. Now, Jeffrey Wolf Green, back in his heyday of teaching in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when we discovered this first moon of Pluto, he would say that that represented that dual desire nature within the soul, separate, return. And I think Charon was the separating, Pluto was the returning, but don't quote me on that. It was just that it was a binary system representing astrologically dual desire nature within the soul. A little bit more for you on Pluto astrology. That 248-year cycle, its shortest transits are always through Scorpio, only 12 years, and its longest transits are through Taurus, 32 years. And as you can see on the screen, I've listed the approximate years that we see Pluto when it travels through all 12 signs of the zodiac. And as you can see right here, Capricorn, approximately 15 years. When it moves into Aquarius 2023-24, it will actually be in Aquarius for 19 years. It'll be in Aquarius 2023-24 through 2022. Pluto in Aquarius 2023-24 through 2043. Pluto in Pisces, 2043 through 2066, if you're interested. Briefly, Pluto mythology. Many of us know that Pluto is also known as Hades, and it rules the underworld. And after the fall of all the Titans are like Chiron, the centers. They exist between Saturn and Uranus orbit. After the fall of the Titans in mythology, Pluto and his brothers divided up the universe, and Pluto got the underground. And he captured Persephone. And she ruled as his queen for so many months of the year. And there's more to this, but I'll let you discover it for yourself. You might know more about mythology than me. I'm not quite an expert on it. But I do think it's important to point out that he was not only known as God of the dead, he was also known as a god of the earth's fertility. And that's part of that cycle with Persephone, in which we have death and rebirth. Again, soul nature from the perspective of EA and reincarnation. So many of you might be familiar that from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, Pluto is representative of the soul. And the soul is that immutable consciousness that exists from life to life. And as we go through multiple lifetimes or incarnations, and we have these experiences in our human form, our physical form. Eventually the soul expands in consciousness, awareness, understanding through this experience of multiple lifetimes. So one of the things that we've been able to observe through EA, just observing in our natural world, is different souls exist at different levels of conscious awareness. We call this evolutionary states, or ES, in the world of EA. And this is not anything you take on a belief. This is a knowledge-based system. You observe, correlate it. You can go discover it for yourself. You don't need to take anybody's word for it. And what has been observed through EA over the last approximately 40 years is approximately 7 out of 10 people, consensus, cowbells around their neck, can't think outside of the space-time they were born into. Religion exists here in an organized form. Approximately 2 out of 10 individuating, breaking free from consensus, learning to discover truth for themselves. You start to find the mystical side of a religion here. You find atheism here. You find souls learning to understand and grasp what we call natural spiritual laws and principles. The New Age movement, metaphysics, exists in the individuated state. And then we expand in consciousness into what we know as the spirituated state, approximately 1 out of 10 souls. And this is where the soul transfers the center of gravity from the ego to the soul itself, and learning to transfer it from individual soul to universal soul as it progresses through the spirituated state. And here is where we understand timeless natural laws and principles on a spiritual basis. We will also know that Pluto, as the archetype of the soul, has a dual desire nature. A desire to separate from that which created it, to incarnate into a physical body, and know that I exist, I am. My soul has an ego. I am aware of myself. I am aware of these desires that I have. The separating desires consist of anything and everything on a manifested level. It can include the inner emotional, mental, spiritual levels as well. Some finer points on that. You can learn those in the studies of EA. But basically all souls go through countless lifetimes exhausting that separating desire nature. And this is where many times religions in an organized sense, especially consensus world, are going to impart that false belief that somehow we can pray ourselves perfect. Jeffrey Green would call this the path of the monastery or the convent. And if you heard me say, if this was true, Catholic priests wouldn't molest choir boys, and Tibetan monks wouldn't be addicted to cigarettes and sugar. The returning desire nature is a desire to know that from which we came, or source energy, God, Goddess, whatever you want to know it. And there basically is one returning desire, to know source energy and return to source energy. Now there's a lot more of this. We go into a lot of detail with this in segment 1 of our EA course if you are interested in more information in regards to this. So when we're looking at Pluto as the archetype of the soul, Pluto by natal Pluto, by house sign aspects, will represent that karmic dynamic, or the area in which the soul will naturally gravitate for unconscious emotional security reasons in any life. Pluto by sign will represent the generation we're born into and the security mechanisms we look for on a generational basis. Pluto by house will be our individual soul and where we are coming from. Transiting Pluto by sign and house will represent the current environment through which any soul is evolving its natal Pluto archetype. Pluto by sign is going to be both generational and individual lessons we are currently learning. And that Pluto sign transit by house will be the individual soul lessons each of us are learning. Now, at the tail end of this slideshow, I have some bullet points of transiting Pluto in Capricorn through each of the 12 houses. I went in detail with that last year's Pluto retrograde. I'm not going to speak to it, but I did include the slideshow for you to peruse and look at from a bullet point example if you'd like to. Here again is that synodic cycle. Synodic means, in traditional sense, any planetary relationship to the sun. Many astrologers will use the synodic cycle between any two planets, meaning from conjunction to square, opposition, square, and conjunction again. And so I've just included this here one more time for you because we're really going to be concentrating right now between April and May as Pluto reverses through 15.5 to 13 degrees Capricorn. But the highlight of any planetary retrograde is their aspect to the sun. Conjunctions with Mercury and Venus, opposition Mars through Pluto. The highlight of this retrograde cycle is going to come right around that 4th of July time period if you're a U.S. citizen, July 6, 2015, and then this year, Sun 14 Cancer, Pluto retrograde at 14 degrees Capricorn. That is the aha moment of understanding the Pluto retrograde and all of the old desires our soul is throwing off, and how Pluto throwing off that outer world Capricorn, reaching to that inner world with Cancer, and all of the inner security we will be looking for through this entire 15-year Pluto retrograde transit cycle through Capricorn. So here's that highlight. End of June, early July, when you really want to be working towards deeper and deeper levels of inner security, especially on an emotional level, Sun in Cancer. Now, Pluto retrograde in general, remember, 5 months of the year, 160 days, or 44% of the time. Pluto retrograde in general means not accepting the status quo. We're going to question our world and how it exists relative to our evolutionary state of consciousness, consensus individuating, spirituating, and we're going to question it relative to our environmental conditionings. The family we're born into, the belief system, the economic conditioning factors, all of the environmental conditioning factors that we have in our world, we're going to be throwing them off to some degree, Pluto retrograde. It means that we are going through an internalization process, and we will have a cyclic withdrawal from external activity. We won't withdraw from activity 100%. But Pluto retrograde means the soul is going inward to throw off old desires, especially of a separating nature that no longer satisfy us. And when Pluto's retrograde, each of us are looking for an individual definition of who we are on the deepest soul level that we can understand and be conscious of. All planetary retrogrades, and especially the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, give us an opportunity to be more conscious of society, collective status quo, and how dissatisfied we are with it, how we want to evolve, grow, break free. This is a much different understanding than some of the traditional astrological archetypes for understanding the planetary retrograde. Yes, you have redo. Yes, you have revisit. Yes, you have to look at things again. But there is a strong individualization process to any planetary retrograde. Pluto retrograde means that we're not going to buy in to any stagnation or crystallization. The retrograde doesn't allow us to do that. It is accelerating the evolutionary process, and it is doing it at all evolutionary states of consciousness. Pluto retrograde emphasizes the returning desire nature in any soul. This is regardless of sign, regardless of house. Pluto retrograde in general. Now this natally, it happens for an entire lifetime. Transiting, what we're looking at tonight for the next 5 months, it is there for all of us for the next 5 months. Now as I speak about Pluto retrograde, if you're born with it natally, this means you're doing it for a lifetime. If Pluto goes retrograde by progression, it means you're doing it from the time that Pluto turns stationary retrograde and typically for the rest of the lifetime, rest of the life, as slow as Pluto moves. Pluto retrograde, emphasizing the returning desires. Again, it's going to accelerate eliminating the separating desire nature. Just think about this. Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. How many of you have been discarding physical stuff? How many of you have been going through a simplification process of all of your material world? Look at this on a collective level. Look at our course as for an example. We have sold our segments in 3-ring binders and DVDs for 10 years. EAN ran the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of EA worldwide from 2002 to 2006. And when Jeffrey handed Leroy and I all of his materials, it was pieces of papers and VHS tapes. We thought we were making progress putting it to DVD. And here we are now in 2014-15, and we're considering pieces of paper and DVDs to just be too much material stuff. Now we have our electronic internet-friendly gadgets, and it's all online. And we're doing this not just in the world of evolutionary astrology, but look at it with all of your information and material things. You know, you don't carry around, some of us do, but not everybody. We have less and less books because we have it on our e-reader. That's Pluto in Capricorn. Yes, Uranus and Aries is part of it, but just think of this with Pluto retrograde. Again, all the material stuff you're letting go of. Now, when it comes to those separating desires within the soul, when Pluto's retrograde, that cyclic or perpetual dissatisfaction is deeper than when Pluto is direct. And as we are looking at Pluto standing still in the sky and turning retrograde this week, within a few days, we're feeling dissatisfaction on all these various ways. This doesn't work, that doesn't work, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. We will all go through cycles of dissatisfaction. And generically, when we look at this from the world of EA and the dual desire nature of the soul via Pluto, we have a desire, we achieve it, momentary sense of satisfaction followed by dissatisfaction. There must be something more. For most souls, vast majority, it's followed by a new separating desire. And in natural law, we must exhaust the separating desire nature. And eventually when we experience that dissatisfaction, the desire nature starts to really question it all. Why am I here? What are my lessons? What's the meaning of all this? And this represents that discovery process of the returning desires. And when you get to be the Jesus, the Buddhas, the Yoganandas, the returning desire becomes the strongest desire, the only desire left. So Pluto in Capricorn is going to represent the maturation process within any soul. And it's going to represent this on an individual basis. It's going to represent this on a collective basis. And so Pluto in Capricorn. Now this includes Pluto Retrograde in Capricorn. The ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. So we're merging the Pluto and Saturn archetypes. Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house, is the structure of individuated consciousness within any soul. It's the boundaries of what we are conscious of. Pluto retrograding Capricorn, we're opening up the boundaries of consciousness and looking deep into the unconsciousness. We are evolving the structure of consciousness. We're throwing off all kinds of outworn structures of consciousness and the crystallized forms that have manifested from inner to outer along the way on a soul level. And from an individual and collective perspective, that doesn't work, this doesn't work, throw it off, throw it off, throw it off. And what it does is Pluto retrograde in Capricorn throws us inward, throws us in to reflect. Involutes us, throws us inward, so that we become aware of all of the inner dynamics, motivations that create the outer world. So that we become aware of all of those environmental conditionings we were born with, that we were raised with, that no longer work, that we're trying to throw off. Because all of those environmental conditionings, and that's Saturn, that's Capricorn, it's created these outer structures and forms. And they don't work for us anymore. So we become highly sensitized to those conditioning factors that have created this outer world when Pluto's retrograding Capricorn. And we have the energy and potential to change those inner dynamics. Pluto retrograde in Capricorn points to the polarity Cancer. And Cancer represents inner security. Cancer represents the emotional maturation process. So when Pluto's retrograde, the outer world doesn't work. We're thrown inward upon ourselves, and we've got to relate to ourselves on an emotional level. We've got to take responsibility for ourselves emotional. We've got to find inner security because the outer world doesn't work somehow. And it will cause us to review a lot of our values and our value systems we're born into, what we've created. Capricorn is standards of right conduct and the judgment around that when we don't conform, Capricorn, to those standards of right conduct. When we don't conform to that, we have what we know as conditioned guilt. And Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, we're throwing off those standards of conduct right and left. I don't care if this is a familial tradition for me. I have to go inward and do what feels right for me. And so we're all going to have to move through layers of guilt that have been conditioned upon us by our family of origin, by the society in which we belong to, by the country we were born into, the culture, the race we were born into. And as we go inward to that Cancer polarity, and we have an emotional maturation process, we become inwardly aware that we are responsible for everything that manifests out there, outside of us. And the maturation process with Capricorn is taking responsibility for our own actions, for our life, for everything that exists in our physical world. And Pluto retrograde is here as it retrogrades in Capricorn, it's making us so aware of this. Where we feel stuck or limited with our day-to-day life, or how we operate in our jobs and our careers and our duties and obligations with partners and family and children and bosses and everything else. And when we feel the frustration of those limitations, it's to go inward and change it emotionally first. And inner reflects outer. We change it inside, we'll see it change outside. It's the gift of Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, to find that emotional self-reliance and wherewithal to realize E equals MC squared. You can't destroy energy, you just change its form. And you evolve the energy to change the form. You expand the awareness of energy behind form. Pluto retrograde in Capricorn will have us working with the hormonal and gender issues, both on a very personal level. For some of us, it's going to be that good old aging process. My hormones don't work quite like they used to. What do I need to do to take care of myself as this physical structure that I call the temple of my soul, or the body, moves through space and time? We can become aware of a lot of our aging issues while Pluto's retrograde in Capricorn. And if we do go inward and make those emotional shifts and changes, it can reflect back outward, Capricorn, in slowing down the aging process, in having a youthening effect. Now, all we have to do is look out there right now from the United States perspective. Thank you for allowing me to teach from this perspective. Although you see it happening everywhere, all countries and all societies are going through an evolutionary process of looking at these hormonal gender issues, the issues of homosexuality. And each year that Pluto's been retrograde in Capricorn since 2008, have you seen a quickening of these issues and how fast they are expanding? You know, in the U.S., it's getting to the point that the Supreme Court, stay tuned if we see that issue addressed by the Supreme Court, because there's so many states. I think, what are we up to? 28, 29 of the 50 states in the United States have now legally found you cannot discriminate against someone on a gender bias basis. Capricorn is the authoritarian parent. Cancer is the nurturing parent. You can no longer look at this as being, as Jeffrey would say, Marlboro Man, Betty Crocker. Sometimes the father's the nurturing parent, sometimes the mother's the authoritarian parent. But we're looking at all of this evolving, and whenever Pluto's retrograde, it throws parenting issues up in the air. It throws how we relate to our parents and how we relate to our children up in the air. All those familial values, structures, judgments. It's like throwing up a deck of cards, seeing how it comes down to reorganize itself. It's not going to work as it used to. We have lessons in, as I addressed briefly, looking at the mortality issues of space and time. Pluto's long transit through Capricorn has us looking at our social responsibilities on a collective level towards our elders. Here in the U.S., we stick them in a nursing home. We charge $91,000 a year on average in a nursing home. Someone pays it, either the familiar assets or all taxpayers through society. It's so privatized that it's costing an arm and a leg. It'll be interesting to see if it's affordable as Pluto finishes up in Capricorn, and how that's all going to be evolving. We don't live communally, Cancer polarity, like we used to. We forget about our elders. And yet, Pluto's long transit through Capricorn, and whenever it's retrograde, looking at that Cancer polarity, we're having to recognize that it doesn't work this way. It doesn't work in a patriarchal way of pretending to ignore anybody, past 30 or past 65 or whatever. And we're having to look at that Cancer polarity of opening up to more and more of the communal basis, that we are interconnected from our first breath to our last through multiple generations. So anytime Pluto's retrograde in Capricorn, it's going to accelerate the evolution of any society and how it looks at all of its responsibilities, from the familial to cultural, religious, economic, and everything else in between. Going to take a drink of water. Any comments or questions at this point?
There are no hand raised on the boards, and no, the board's been kind of quiet. So, yeah, it's interesting looking at this Capricorn-Cancer axis with. I never thought about that, but you really just think of how we've come with gender rights between '08, like you say, and now, 7 years later. It's just been really interesting to see the acceptance level of mass consciousness in flux with all that LGBT, and all those related issues, and the defensive posturing of these state legislatures to still want to hold on to those old days of judgment.
Yeah. And as we move through the second half of the Pluto Cap transit, we'll see the issues with the elders come up in the news more and more. You could see scandals during, of distreatment of elders in nursing homes. Issues with children showing up more and more. I mean, again, some of you here, Leroy and I follow the consensus news because I watch consensus evolution baby steps at a time. And there just seems to have been a wave of articles in the news about parents mistreating children, parents abusing children, if not murdering children, and we're becoming so much more aware of that type of stuff. So from really making, preschool in the U.S. a basic right when we require two-parent income in order to survive, all the way up to making our elderly care a basic right, as we look at the fact that, a Social Security income really doesn't guarantee that you can survive. So those issues will continue to be in the news through the rest of this cycle. And many of us in the world of astrology, we saw these inklings 2008, 9, 10. As we get to the middle third from 10 to 20 degrees, and as we get to this halfway point of 15 degrees, Pluto in Cap, it's in our face. This Pluto retrograde cycle and the 2016 Pluto retrograde cycle, this is Pluto crossing back and forth from that 15-degree mark. This is the nitty-gritty of issues that we're going to be dealing with. And it's any and all of the Capricorn Cancer archetypes that we see going on here. Now, one more time, here is the Sun-Pluto synodic cycle. This time what I want to point out to you is I go from the conjunction in early January at 13 Cap to the next conjunction next January at 15 Cap. This is one complete cycle from conjunction to conjunction. What I'm pointing out to you now is the Pluto waxing square we've just been having. Pluto's going to go retrograde, the opposition, and then here's the Sun-Pluto last quarter square. And if you want to look at the planetary pair of Sun-Pluto, this is the creative actualization on a soul level consciously. And you put this in Capricorn, Cancer, and we're creatively actualizing our own soul's identity within society. Now that identity is Capricorn, but it's also a Cancer word. We have to know thyself on an internalized level to then be able to go out there and function and create in the world. This is the cycle that operates and gives us the form to do this through. So pay attention again when you get to early July as to how you are having to really know who you are, regardless of a position in society, regardless of a job, regardless of any of your materialization. Can you really get to the deepest levels of that inner emotional security? I know who I am. And I am having a revelation of the next level of how I am to create in my world. This 5-month retrograde is how you are consciously revealing it to yourself, with the highlight of the Sun-Pluto opposition. Mercury has one of its retrograde cycles, pretty active to Pluto, right around the time period when Pluto is getting ready to turn stationary direct. Remember, that was September 24th, 25th, Pluto at 12:58 Capricorn. That's going to be the second time that Mercury in Libra will be making last quarter squares to Pluto in Capricorn. So as we're getting to Pluto stationary direct, the end of its cycle, in essence, we're going to have some communication standoffs, lines in the sand, trying to control the conversation, trying to control who says what, trying to make somebody else follow us and do what we want to do. Distortions. Or we're going to be making that effort to listen and reach deeper understandings within ourselves and our relationships. Pluto retrograde in Libra, can I actually listen and hear what you're saying? Especially as your own soul, Pluto direct, is recognizing how you really want to move forward with your life, especially out in the world. So we have the potential here to reach for deeper understandings and create new levels of fairness between ourself and another. And we'll do this individually. We will also be working to do this on a collective level as well. The old patriarchal stance of warring our way to peace is wearing out. And we could find ourselves during this time period in September, October, as Pluto's turning direct, as we're looking through this Mercury retrograde, of really having some strong collective conversations on how, it's not going to work anymore. I'm waiting as we move into the second half of Pluto in Capricorn. I'm waiting for the peaceful Muslims to start standing up to the radicals. We're not going to eliminate the radicals by bombing them. It's like the what do you call that? The multi-headed snake. You cut one head off and how many more show up? We are going to have to go back to some of that ability to communicate, to listen. We're going to have to go back to the collectives, really reaching for peace and that Cancer polarity, energizing peace, to then see it start to come outward. So I'm waiting for those movements of the Islam faith that will start standing up for peace, start standing up for respect of other beliefs, and how do we all get along in the same sandbox called planet Earth. Mars, I always like to include Mars with Pluto because Pluto represents the unconscious desire nature of the soul, dual desires, separating, returning desires. And those unconscious desires are made conscious via Mars. Mars is the conscious desire nature. It's the leading edge of our desired nature, the instinctive desire to become. So I did the same thing with Mars that I did with the Sun, but here we are working with a 2-year cycle. The last Mars-Pluto conjunction was in November, 11.5 cap. And the next one is 2 years later, 15 cap. The Mars opposition is going to come this year in mid-July with Pluto, just a bit after the Sun. The Sun-Pluto opposition, remember, was July 6th. Mars, July 15th. So they're going to kind of be working in tandem together at really waking us up. I put the trines in because Mars has one trine with Pluto while it's retrograde. Red is when Pluto's retrograde. But you can see the waxing square. You can see the last quarter or waning square of Mars as well. And as we look at Mars going through at least 6 or 7, possibly 8 conjunctions with Pluto in Capricorn, 15 years. What this is achieving new levels of inner security beyond the structure of our personal world. And this is especially true when Pluto's retrograde. Now, 1 year Pluto retrogrades, we can have a Mars opposition. The next year Pluto retrogrades, Mars is going to be somewhere before or after a conjunction because Mars is a 2-year cycle. 1 year it travels with the inner planets. The next year it's opposing the inner planets as it does its own retrograde. So this year, Mars is traveling with the inner planets. It's opposing Pluto. Mars is putting emphasis to that Sun, Mercury, Venus cycle. It's traveling with them. So Mars is going to emphasize that inner security that we're all reaching for on a conscious desire level, regardless of how our world is structured, regardless of where we feel stuck or limited or frustrated. It's going to emphasize again going inward and finding that expanding level of inner security, emotional self-reliance. and Mars putting energy into that. Jupiter, even though it doesn't have anything going on, specifically during the Mars retrograde, I've included it. Remember 2013-14 when Jupiter was in Cancer? We had Jupiter oppose Pluto 3 times, 2013-14. Now it's moved into, well, I should have put Jupiter waning Pluto. Now it's moved into the waning trines with Pluto. You can see that the first one's going to come right as Pluto's turned direct and starting to move forward again. Pluto direct, September 24th, 25th, 1258 cap. Look at just beginning to move as it does this first waning trine. And you can see that it will make 3 of these. And so we're going to have 2 earth signs, but what we're going to be looking at as we move into this fall in Pluto direct, Virgo is conditioned guilt via religions. Capricorn is conditioned guilt via societal conformity and conditionings. And so we're going to have, we're really going to be looking at socially imposed guilt to conform versus an ability to really make an effort to understand someone else. We're past the opposition. We're in the second half of the cycle. We're into relationships, waning trines, and creating community inclusiveness. You look at the natural archetype of Virgo, and it's the shifting from self being the center of the world to learning how to have fairness with others. Leo to Libra, Virgo in between. And what these waning trines are going to give us an opportunity to do is really create some community inclusiveness. And if we're not doing that, we're going to be in the distortions of guilt. We can also be in the distortions of the anger, because they're not doing what we want them to do, Pluto Capricorn. They're not conforming the way we want them to conform. Stay tuned. I'll expand on this one when I look at Jupiter moving through Virgo for a year later this year. Jupiter goes into Virgo, I think, in August. But I wanted to include this to give you an idea of some of the aspects that are going on with the other planets to Pluto. Leroy?
You know, we know that Pluto's retrograding back to 13 Capricorn. What is the natal Pluto for the U.S. chart? Again, we've had a couple questions from students that kind of wanted to review that and see what this July 2015, how that might relate to that Pluto upcoming U.S. Pluto return. Can you help there?
Yes, if you'll be patient, a couple more slides, we're going to dig into that. I'm trying to go fast here. Pluto, the U.S. Pluto is 27.5 Capricorn, and the Pluto in Capricorn return to the U.S. chart is going to be 2022. 27.5 Capricorn. I'll show you the chart in just a moment, okay? Now, we do have Saturn.
Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to put that one in red. We do have Saturn, Pluto aspects that are going on with this Pluto retrograde. And basically, these are the waning semi-squares. This is moving to balsamic phase, Saturn to Pluto. And you can see the dates and the degrees. It just so happens that all of these waning semi-square aspects, okay, are when Saturn's back into Scorpio and Pluto's in Capricorn. But this is a huge one. This is all of the old career and economic patterns disintegrating. This is all the old conformities and conditioning factors that are just going out the windows left and right. Now the rebirthing, I put in approximately the first half of next decade. Saturn's going to have one conjunction to Pluto in 2020 in Capricorn. And then it's going to be in that new phase to Pluto Capricorn for those first 5 years of next decade. But between 2015 and 2020, Saturn is balsamic phase to Pluto, getting closer and closer and closer to 360 and having the conjunction, again, 2020. And so it's like, look, just looking at this Saturn relationship to Pluto, look at everything that is just falling apart. And for instance, in the U.S., look at how our conservative party at this point in time, the Republican Party, and the last gasps of, trying to deny immigration, deny health care for everybody, deny gender rights, let alone all the financial stuff that goes on behind the scenes, deny, economic fairness and equality for everybody going on. You'll continue to just see more of these types of patterns in the news. Now, every time Pluto is retrograding Capricorn with Saturn for the next 5 years, it's going to accelerate this breakdown. And for those who reach over to that Cancer polarity and have been working to build inner security, emotional self-worth, we won't feel the breakdowns as intensely as those that are trying to cling to all of those old crystallized structures and forms. Now, a couple more slides here. I just wanted to bring this slide in again. Pluto and Capricorn, Saturn and Scorpio, they've had a mutual reception. 2012 through 2015. Here's some key words for you from a slide I borrowed from an old webinar. The distortions: increased need to control others, the environment, money, resources, sexuality distortions, abuses, relationship control games. This is the stuff that's crumbling. And if we're really trying to work with this energy, we want to make an effort to let go of any old realities that do not work for us. We want to search for deeper levels. Here's that self-empowerment, that Cancer polarity. We want to work to empower others. We want to work to share resources. We want to have everyone feeling sexually empowered and worthwhile. Just a reminder, Saturn's in Scorpio, June 14th through September 17th, entirely within the Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. So Saturn's going to leave Scorpio for the next 29 years on September 17th when it goes back into Sag. Pluto direct again, remember, September 24th, 25th. There's Mars is, we've got cycles that are building up to, no, it was the Mercury retrograde. The Mercury retrograde when Pluto goes direct. Saturn leaves Scorpio and goes into Sag when Pluto goes direct. You can expect September to be a potentially strong time period for catapulting us forward. So you can reflect on all of this on an individual basis as you're listening to this. And just touch in as you're hearing this intuitively. And how is this being reflected in your own world? Again, Pluto Capricorn retrograde through the 12 houses. You'll have that at the end of the slides when you get the PDF for this. I want to cross over and talk about this a little more collectively. First of all, the current cycle started when Pluto went into Aries back in 1822. Remember, Pluto in Aries is a 30-year cycle. So it was there from 1822 to 1851. However, you know, when you look at the natural zodiac, forget these words here and look for a moment at my four-colored wheel in the background. You see it's divided into quadrants. This is the 0-degree Aries point where my mouse arrow is. From 0 down to the bottom, the red quadrant is 90 degrees, 90 to 180. This is the Libra point. So Pluto was in Libra, Scorpio, Sag from 1971-72 through 2008. That was a modality cycle. Modalities is how we act. And remember, modalities, there's three: cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal, initiate; fixed, perseveres or sustains; and mutable, releases, integrates. And so we can look at these long Pluto cycles through each of these quadrants as being a mini cycle within themselves. And here we looked at this modality cycle as evolving our outer relationships and cosmological understandings of life. And when Pluto went into Capricorn, it started a new modality cycle that encompasses expanding societal frameworks until society itself must rebirth with Pluto in Aries. And the next cycle is initiated in 2066. So look at this, expanding societal frameworks. We've only had Pluto in Capricorn since 2008. We got to go through Pluto in Aquarius yet. You talk about watching society change over the next 60 years. Stay tuned. Our children and grandchildren are going to be a part of all of this, and then we're going to see it disintegrating with Pisces. Maybe I'll have a class on that before I leave planet Earth this time. Pluto in Capricorn, following Pluto Sag. This represents on a collective soul basis is all kinds of groups and societies learning how to link their philosophy and collective identity within the framework of any society, or in our case today, within the framework of planet Earth. The entirety of the globe, the global village. How is each group of people, each race, each country, each religion, how is it expanding its own understanding of itself and its own identity, and how it operates in the world on a collective global level? We see the distortions of patriarchy with the wars, rapes, and murders. Is it possible that in this modality cycle, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, do you think we could wear out war? It's my hope. I don't know if we will do it, but, you know, how many times do we need to blow the world up? Multiple times. Remember, Capricorn is that cardinal modality, so there's a new cycle starting, and there are new frameworks within any society that's being initiated. It's also, though, on a collective level, that crises in consciousness. It's the last quarter square to that Aries initiation point when Pluto first moved into Aries back in 1822. So we're facing the limitations of all those old conditionings that are no longer working, at the same time with the cardinal modality that we are having all of the initiations to go forward. So what are we initiating? All societies and countries, again, are learning how to take charge of their own destiny. Third world countries evolving up, Middle East countries evolving up to say, how dare you, imperialistic U.S., tell us how to live our life? And we have had, if you're interested in a good article, the latest issue of Vanity Fair, I've subscribed to it for years, not because I want to look at all the expensive clothes and perfumes and societal stuff, but for their great writing. There's a new article in the latest issue of Vanity Fair talking about how ISIS made a name for themselves in the last year, and yet before we go charging into war, we must go back to when we stuck our nose in there, which we did back with the senior elder President Bush, number 41. And it's a great article if you want to read and how we can understand a lot of what we're seeing happen over there. The forms that have been created over there are a result of our own messing around. And so as we go through this Pluto retrograde, it's countries throwing off other countries, telling them how to take charge of their life and how to be as a country. Not everybody's going to be at the same evolutionary pace of granting freedom and liberty to all their citizens. How well can we educate on a grassroots community level to help those who want peace rise up? Collectively, we're going to have lessons in social responsibility for any country with its own people and how it relates to other countries and societies. As you see from my cute little cartoon, it came out of, I think, the Denver Post. Sometimes it's good when justice isn't so blind. If you haven't heard about this, we've had so many killings of black youth by police, and they've all went, it's all, the cops were doing self-defense. And here we had this innocent bystander record a cop killing a black man over a traffic violation and just outright basically murdering him and then messing with the evidence and claiming it was something else, starting to get away with it, and it made this individual come forth with his video, and it's went viral, and it's basically, how many times does this go on? It would have went on again. I mean, there's so many things that are going, so many archetypes of Pluto and Capricorn, and especially as it's going retrograde, revealing this stuff within just this one instance that's taking place.
Kim?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if you have all your other apps closed down as you usually do, because you're coming in, you're kind of breaking up a little bit for me, so I just wanted to see if we can address that now.
I always have all of my other apps closed down, honey. So
Okay.
It is just part of the recording. I apologize for that. Has my voice started to come back a little better yet? And
yeah, it'll be fine. I'll let you know if we reach that point where it's not okay. Okay.
okay, you're coming through that way as well as I listen to you coming back to me, and so it might be. I'm making a note for voice distortion, so it might be interesting to check out and see how this shows on the tape.
Yeah, I think it's
Leroy?
going to be fine. A couple people have come back and said it sounds okay on the other end of the line, which is what's the most important here. So maybe it's just between you and I and the system. Let's just continue and we'll monitor it.
All right. So all groups have to undergo another cycle of social maturation, and especially relative to the current environmental conditionings that exist within any country. In the U.S., it's the whole police brutality thing that's been going on, and the collective saying, you're going to wear a body cam because when you do, you're more respectful, and so's the person when they realize the camera is recording them. Both parties become more respectful to each other. Social maturation, mutual respect. All groups must learn self-discipline, self-determination. They must take charge of their life within the context of their society and its evolving needs. Again, the example is the quote-unquote Black Lives Matter social movement, and those that are standing up and saying, we don't act like the cops. We need to have non-violent protests. We need to bring it to the attention of society in general of how these cops are actually operating. And it's not all cops. I do not mean to say that at all. You know, the bad apple in the bushel of apples, it's usually just a few, both on the cop side and both on the disruptive use side, or, etc. All groups are learning how to establish individuality and authority within any society or culture. So this is going to all be accelerated through Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. And over the next 5 months, you're going to hear about this group in this country and that group in that country standing up, taking charge. I think in the Middle East, for instance, we have groups of people that are tired of, say, the Islam extremists taking over, towns and killing people and destroying homes and forcing women back to the Dark Ages. You're going to watch these Pluto retrogrades of, again, the broader groups in Muslim societies standing up to them and saying, no, we're not going to do this. There will be some that want the extremes. There will be those that had a chance to get westernized, which is what happened in Iraq under Saddam on a general level. Those women are not going to want to go back to not being able to educate, or not being able to have a job, or not being able to drive their cars. We'll watch these types of things coming through on individual levels. You watch the election that just happened in Greece, and how the, broader groups of all ages were just, the country is tired of all the austerity that the European Union is trying to push upon them, that the private bankers in the European Union were essential in creating. They're going to stand up and say, no, this isn't working. It doesn't work this way. The old forms are dying. We need new forms that are going to be more fair. Communities, Cancer polarities are going to be standing up for themselves. Now let me show you this visually. Here's the generic cycle of phases and aspects. You see the 8 phases around here? The last Pluto conjunction, this is 0 degrees Aries, came in. Oops, that should be 1822. I didn't get that corrected. I will correct that before for the slides. Here, this is it in 8, okay? 1822, when Pluto went into Aries. It was 1912 through 1936, 37, 38 that Pluto was in Cancer, that we had that waxing square, and we went through the dirty 30s when Pluto was a square to itself. And remember all the changes in society in the U.S. that happened. I come from the Northern Plains, the dirty 30s, and how they brought through the New Deal, and government, put people to work creating the infrastructure. We have a lot of things up here in the Northern Plains. It might be all over. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, and then there was the CCC, Civilian Corps. I can't remember what that one was. A lot of that stuff came when Pluto was in Cancer and made a waxing square to itself. The oppositions, we know that when Pluto was in Virgo, it had the conjunctions to Uranus. Here was its oppositions in Libra. We followed those conjunctions in the middle 60s into the 70s, and there was still so much revolution of groups of people all over. Here we are since 2008, Pluto, last quarter square, starting from 0 all the way round to itself. So here is how you can look at this from a more visual perspective. And of course, it'll be 2066 before Pluto comes around and in Aries again. So on a collective level, can you see as Pluto goes through Capricorn and then Aquarius and then Pisces? The initiation of new structures, the continuing rebellion to let it go, and then society itself having to learn how to get along on the largest levels we possibly can until we start all over. And every time Pluto's retrograde, not just through Capricorn, but as we go through Aquarius and Pisces, it's quickened. It's quickened with the old dying off and the new coming along. Now, here's the same cycle of phases and aspect looking at it with Uranus. Here's Pluto's last conjunction that I talked about. It's as if instead of this being Aries, this is Virgo. We put that conjunction that they had 16, 17 degrees Virgo right here at 0. And this is when Uranus was in the same spot as Pluto. And Uranus has now moved around to be... Oh, I erased the wrong slide. Oh, did I? Yes, I erased the wrong side. I had all the other stuff taken out. Here is Pluto in that first quarter square to, or excuse me, Uranus in that first quarter square to Pluto. But what I wanted to point out was Uranus is within that 10-degree orb right here, first quarter square. Uranus, as it goes forward and retrogrades, it's within that 10-degree orb all the way through 2019. And as I've said before, 2012 to 2015, we had the 7 waxing squares. Uranus would get 90 degrees and then it'd go back into the crescent phase and be less than 90 degrees. Well, as of March of this year, 2015, Uranus is now beyond that. And I think for these next 4 years, 2015 through 2019, this is when we really see the busting out, the breaking free, the intensity of changes that are going to come. And Pluto retrogrades intensifying that, and we're also going to see Uranus retrograde intensifying that as well. So you can just start to see from a visual perspective of how so much of this is going on. And yes, I'm talking Pluto retrograde, but how can you look at Pluto without looking at Uranus? And what I wanted to point out for those of you who did not get my Uranus-Pluto webinar, the conjunction before was the 1850s in late Aries. And as we move through that, that's when we're laying the initiation, the seed thoughts to the Civil War that came along late 50s into the early 60s. And Pluto conjunctions in 1966, as I said before, remember the Civil Rights Act for blacks was passed. In other words, we've been starting to see the trend or the environmental conditionings with Uranus and Pluto, that there is something to do with race relations between them. The next conjunction, it's a 127-year cycle, won't be till 2100 in Taurus, but here we are with the Uranus-Pluto waxing squares right now, especially in 2015, and look at all of the, again, the black issues that have been in the news in the United States. Here was the map that I used, in that pink was slave states, green was free states, and these guys were in between. But I talked about the fact that the U.S. was founded in 1850. Here's another one for you. Here was the original 13 states that ratified the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution that came in the 1880s. California became a state in 1850. I'm going to show you the state chart in just a moment here. 1859, Oregon. The rest of them started to fill in. Here was 1864. These were the 1880s, then 1876, then we had the early 1900s. Texas was 1845. So you can see this was related to Uranus-Pluto conjunctions, 1845, and especially 1850. And you can get some flavor of how we were coming across here with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, you know, on a big broad level, looking at 10, 20 years before and after. But what stuck out to me so much was California became a state September 9th, 1850. The source of this is Mark Penfield. He was the one that did charts for the U.S. and Canada, and he went in and researched all of the state and provincial records of not only the states themselves or provinces themselves, but also the major cities, and researched it all and did rectification. And the notes were that whoever was president at the time, I don't remember, he signed the state of California, admitted it to the Union just after lunch, and so rectified to California, September 9th, 1850, 9:41 a.m. local mean time, San Jose. That must have been the first capital before it settled into Sacramento. But look at this chart. Look at Saturn retrograde, 20 degrees Aries. Here's that Uranus-Pluto conjunction. Uranus is retrograde, 29.5 degrees, 29:34 Aries. Excuse me, Pluto, if I said that right. Pluto retrograde, 29:34 Aries. Uranus retrograde, 29:50 Aries. New phase that. And here's Uranus. So happens the Uranus retrograde this year. Here it is, 29.5 Aries back to 16.5 Aries. 3 times over this natal Saturn. Uranus going over this natal Pluto. And Uranus here. 2017 is when it'll go over that. This is what I saw when I thought, OMG, look at this spring. I did an event, transits for today. Look at this spring. The South Node's been over this in the last couple of years. Aries, fiery energy, the drought, the ability to grow the crops, 6th house, that's going on right here. The oppositions to Mars and Mercury that have been happening in the last couple of years, the other planets that are going to come along. This is that California drought right here that you're seeing, and it doesn't look to be anything that's going to be gone very fast. Now, here's the Neptune conjunction to natal Neptune. California is having a Neptune return. It's just coming off of it. So they're having a real deep spiritual crisis on how this state is going to move forward. I'm looking at Pluto retrograde here. It's been squaring the Mars. It's going to square the Mercury 3 times. It did Mars last year. It's going to come back and square Mercury 3 times. Can they get the word out, first quarter square, of what's happening in regards to water rights and what we see happening here in California as an example? We are seeing happening worldwide. All of the super rich, the 0.01% of the 1%, are buying up water rights left and right, be they individual families or families working behind corporations. They're buying up water rights all over, and water's being looked at as the new gold. And I'm looking at Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, and how can we get the word out about this? And then when Uranus goes retrograde in July, how can we continue to get the word out, initiating the communications about what's happening here, and how Pluto in Capricorn, the 1%, the haves, are buying up resources, Capricorn, and what are we going to do about it? Now, I'd like to point out to you an article that I just think all of us must know about and share and spread, and it's by one of my great fans, Ellen Brown. Here's the article right up here on top. The California Water Wars, another form of asset stripping. What's happening here is happening everywhere. She's the author of these 2 books right here. This is her website, webofdebt.com. For the first book, you get this book if you want to get some details. You can skip it and get it recapped here and going forward in the public bank solution. And so here's the organization she initiated that's taking a life on its own. I preach this website and this book, especially as Pluto's retrograde, and we want to open up and have truth revealed to us and really know how to break free from these old structures, and from my perspective, create new monetary structures, new economic structures. It's all within the power to the people, Cancer polarity, to do that. One of the things that was so eye-opening for me that I had never heard of in this article is that the state of California is being controlled by these 1% that are buying up all of the water resources. And there is a gentleman whose name is Paul, P-A-L, not P-A-L, Power, P-A-U-E-R. And he created the Primary Water Institute. And I did not know this. You know how, the freshwater lakes and streams is only 3% of the fresh water, 97% of the water is seawater, salty water. Well, do you know that we have primary water sources, which are deep under the ground? And these are water. You know how we drill for oil and how deep we go now for oil and gas. We can drill for water. And he has done the research to show that California could take care of its entire drought for $800 million. It could drill primary water wells for $100,000 apiece, less than 2% of the cost of the big water tunnels that California is looking at creating. And he could, the state could just instantly take care of its water problems without robbing anything from the surface, not having anything to do with water on the surface. Now, Pluto retrograde, this is eye-opening stuff on how looking at these limitations, Capricorn, and the 1% controlling the water, and the Cancer polarity, the public solution, Cancer, community, grassroots, and how we could solve this issue in the blink of an eye with meager resources. And what it will take is the will of the people. So look back on this as we are looking at Uranus getting ready to go over these 3 planets and then go oppose these Venus, Moon, the public. Moon is the public and collective mundane astrology. Venus is always the resources to survive individually and collectively. So we're going to have Uranus make these conjunctions and oppositions over the next 2-3 years. We're going to have Pluto moving into future retrograde cycles over these all the way up to 2023-24 when it's making the last quarter squares of Pluto to Pluto in the California chart, then Uranus, and making the waxing squares to Venus and Moon. What I suspect is we could continue, they're talking about California running into a mega drought. Look, when I saw this chart, I'm like, oh gosh, stay tuned. And yet, there's always evolution. And so, again, I very much recommend you look up this article. And you can see it's from March 24th. And get on this bandwagon, especially if you're from the western states. It's not just California. Those of you out there all over the West, along the Rocky Mountains, and west from that, so the western half of the U.S., especially the Southwest, you're all going to be involved with this. Can you be a part of this discovery and this wake-up with what's going on? And by the way, if I may, I'd like to take out a moment and tell you that if you haven't got a copy of Robert Glover's book, Time and Money, the second edition came out in 2012. I don't remember when the first edition was. I think it was the 1980s. And then when EAN did a webinar conference a couple of years ago, we had Robert Glover as one of our speakers. And I'll give you the slide to the webinars that I did with him in just a moment here. Robert passed away in January. And he was 84. It was his Uranus return. So the possibility of this book getting republished is not real big unless somebody takes it over in the future. If the universe and resources allow me to, Pluto Cap, I would love to. So here's the second edition of it that, again, was published a couple of years ago. If you want a copy of this book, get it. Get it off of Amazon. It's a great book talking about monetary policies and how the U.S. in its entire history was based upon the control of the banking and monetary policies throughout our history. And I go into that in detail in the workshops we did. And again, I'll show you that slide in just a moment. And so moving along, before I move into the U.S. chart, what I want to show you is that these Uranus-Pluto waxing squares have been hitting the U.S. chart pretty strongly in 2014-15. We've had Pluto in Capricorn making oppositions to the U.S. Sun in Cancer. It did it 3 times last year. This year, Pluto in Capricorn is making waxing squares to the U.S. Saturn in Libra. You see these waxing squares in green. Last year, Uranus in Aries made last quarter squares to the U.S. Sun in Cancer, and it made oppositions to the U.S. Saturn in Libra. So here's the dates for you on the PDF slides. Here's the U.S. chart, and I must point something out. I did not quite pay attention when I drew up this chart, and I've been carrying this through a few webinars. This date is wrong. This should be 2:13 a.m. So I used the Gemini rising chart for the U.S., the same one that Robert Glover used. And by the way, this is also the chart that Jeffrey Wolf Green used as well. And July 4th, 1776, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 2:13 a.m. Robert used Placidus houses, and so I stuck with that. This is the chart that I had used when we did our lectures together. It gives that U.S. Pluto in Capricorn 2733, and it is retrograde in the 9th house, because so much of the U.S. was founded upon religious freedom. And from Robert's perspective, he feels that the founding fathers, when they did the debates in Philadelphia, they would all go to the pub afterwards and have their evening meal and their mug of beer or malt. And he really felt that they probably talked into the nights for those weeks that they were together and ironed it out. And most of the founding fathers were Freemasons, and the Freemasons were astrologers. Now, grant you, back in the 1700s, they did not know that Pluto existed. They were working with the planets that were visible by the eye. And here's this conjunction of Venus, Jupiter, Sun from 2 to 13 degrees Cancer. And if you ever wanted some prosperity planets, resource planets, Venus, Jupiter, Sun. Second house, the Venus house of resources. So this was always Robert's idea of what the Freemasons were actually looking at with the chart. And I would assume that they were frustrated enough, Saturn in Libra square to the Sun in Cancer, they were frustrated enough with England that they weren't going to wait any longer. They knew that this square was going to be here. And was this there's a lot of things that you could go into. There's the theories of, the discord that was happening between them and England. I won't go into that. Jeffrey Green always intuited that when he saw, I don't know how he heard about, the Gemini rising chart. It's existed for quite a while. I think when he saw that Pluto in Capricorn in the 9th house and they wanted the religious freedom, Pluto was retrograde. And yet we also have the religious conformity into Christianity. We're going to see waves of that being addressed as we look at this Pluto return coming closer and closer. But in 2014, the Pluto retrogrades had oppositions to the Sun. You looked at the polarity, any of you, have you seen the polarity between liberals versus conservatives? Democrats versus Republicans, and just that whole polarization that is existing there. And that polarization between the haves, Capricorn, have-nots, Cancers, have-nots are both exist here, but this is what's really coming out now. This Pluto retrograde, again, Pluto waxing squares to the Saturn in Libra. Are we going to find fairness for all concerned, Libra? Or is there going to be more games about the haves trying to take control of everything for themselves, 5th house? Now this chart is from 2014. I didn't have a time to put a new chart, so we have Jupiter has moved over here into Leo, going into this 4th house here. We'll see how things turn out there. Saturn soon. It's going to move into the 7th house. I see a lot of communications coming out in regards to all of this. Uranus is going to continue to, this is also the polarization. Last quarter squares to the Sun. This is also what doesn't work anymore. So this is in place. There's going to be some other things in place as well with big transits. But here's Pluto getting closer and closer and closer to our first U.S. Pluto return. It's in the 8th house here, still in the resources and money. It'll be interesting. Next time I do a webinar, you can draw this up for yourself if you want. See where the porphyry houses go for Capricorn, and then watch the Pluto transits over there and see if the psychology. Jeffrey used the porphyry houses because he felt that it represented the psychological changes better as a house system. Well, watch transiting Pluto with the Gemini rising chart and see how we perceive that 9th house cusp to be changing. Now, if you use the Sibley chart, which I think was 5 something in the afternoon, that gives us a Sagittarius rising, and it puts natal Pluto in the 2nd house, which can also be in regards to the resources and control of the resources if you would use that chart. I think it puts Neptune up in the 9th house. It also had planets in the 9th house, so both charts work. And I'll tell you, as we are looking at Pluto and Capricorn getting closer and closer to the U.S. Pluto, it's 2733 Cap and it's retrograde regardless of what chart you use for July 4th, 1776. The closer and closer we get, the more we are seeing, again, Pluto balsamic natal Pluto in Capricorn, all the old structures that will not work in our country. using U.S. as an example here. And every time Pluto's turning retrograde, even though it backs off from natal Pluto, it's still making us aware, retrograde, making us conscious and aware of all of the old forms and structures that do not work in our country. It's doing it collectively by making us aware of all of the old forms and structures that do not work collectively on planet Earth. Stay tuned. Still more of a ride for those of us who live in the U.S. But we also, every time Pluto is retrograde, pointing to these right here, we have that opportunity to really go with grassroots movements, the people being emotionally stirred up and activated. And we will look at transiting Pluto in Capricorn turning retrograde to Mercury in the 2020-2021 time period. And we'll continue to see a lot of things stirred up and shared. Uranus will make the square to this natal U.S. Mercury in 2016-17. So we're going to continue to ride out this decade with so much that's taking place and happening. Questions as I'm rolling through this. I've gotten through most of my slides. I just have a few left to go.
No questions on the board, Kim.
All right. This one's just review. This is an old slide I just pulled out. When Pluto made these oppositions to the Sun, polarization, identity crises. Just look at these different issues. The gender issues, financial, constitutional, healthcare issues, climate issues. Look at how all of these things have been so much up in the air for us. Now, what I feel has really happened here with Pluto in Capricorn and the 1% and the haves versus have-nots, this area, financial issues, really got stirred up in 2008, 2009. The Federal Reserve had its centennial in 2013. They try to keep that out of the news as much as they can. That sort of really made me recognize how much corporate America controls the news that we get in the public level. I still am waiting for these financial issues and how, whether we're going to be private central banking, private bankers loan the government money, and the taxpayers must pay interest back to the private banking, private central banking, versus public central banking. Government creates its own money. Interest comes back to the government, and the interest is turned around and given back to the taxpayers in the form of building infrastructure. I still think that this issue is going to come to a head yet. So stay tuned for that one. Now, these first quarter squares to Saturn, all of these issues and more, there needs to be breakthroughs. First quarter square, new directions, first quarter square. Or, relative to that Saturn in Libra, we continue to become more and more and more polarized yet with regard to haves versus have-nots and fairness for all. Now, every time Pluto turns retrograde, through these next 5 months, you can look for things to come in the news in regards to these areas. And it's emphasized with Pluto retrograde. It's emphasized when Pluto goes stationary retrograde. It's emphasized when Pluto goes stationary direct. These would be the time periods to just share the information. And rather than taking more time or boring everybody with who've heard me speak about this in the past, my personal soapbox. Here were the 2 lectures that I did with Robert Gover in the fall of 2013. Time and Money, Past, Present, and Future, Part 1, Part 2. If you think that it's too hard to understand how we have monetary and banking policies in the U.S. or in any country, we break it down. It's not hard to understand. I highly recommend these webinars, and you can find them by going to our website, evolutionaryastrology.net. Leroy's going to take over.
Yeah, in fact, we have to make a couple edits to your slides in this presentation, so I think we'll just include a link or both links to both products on our website, because that'll be the easiest way for everybody to get the information, and even those that purchase this afterwards.
Yes, and if you can purchase them individually, or if you want to, they were added to Section 3 of the Astro Library.
There you go. Yep.
So for 1 month, $29, which is the price of the 2 individual lectures at $15 a piece, you can go order Section 3 of the Astro Library, and you won't only get these 2 lectures, you'll get another 100 hours of information in Section 3 of the Astro Library. So I would recommend that. I cannot speak highly enough about this, and especially as Pluto goes retrograde in Capricorn, it behooves all of us to educate ourselves on a collective level on how we want to be involved with breaking down the old monetary structures and Cancer polarity, creating economic fairness and prosperity for all of us. It's not hard. It just takes enough awareness on a grassroots level so the masses overcome the few. We've done it before. We're going to do it again. So, as I'm just checking in one more time to see if anybody has any other questions, here are future classes, planetary retrogrades. The Venus retrograde. That's right. I got the Venus retrograde up here, which I had wanted to do. Our next Mercury retrograde class, which is always my freebies, and I go into a lot of detail. Mercury retrograde is always a lot more active than mainstream or traditional astrology puts out there, and I do this one for free. May 18th, if you want to mark that date down. You'll have these on your slideshow. And then again, just briefly, on the end of the slides, this is from last year's Pluto retrograde, because it's such a long transit. I thought I wasn't going to just repeat this information, but I wanted to just give it to you on slides so that you can be looking at this and you can look at this information for yourself on your own time. It's just some keywords and bullet points on how the Pluto retrograde in Capricorn is going to be working its way through the house transits. Now, if you want more information on how Pluto in Capricorn is operating through each of the 12 houses for the next 15 years, I did a 26-hour workshop on Pluto in Capricorn and went through the 12 houses in detail. And I did that back in 2012. And I think that also, Leroy, correct me, is in Section 3 of the Astro Library.
In Section 1, that's one of those that was so important and so core to EA that we went ahead and I think included it in both Section 1 on planets, the archetypes, the houses, as well as the forecasting Section 3. So pick which one of those you'd like to subscribe to, and you won't go wrong.
All right, so there you go. You've got these as bullet points, and if you want to educate yourself on those monetary policies and in-depth Pluto in Capricorn, you can go to section 3 of the Astro Library and easily find that information. All right, everyone. I hope that you have gotten a few tidbits of information out of this, and I hope that you've been sparked in how your own soul is breaking free from all of your old outworn forms and structures, and you're ready to go inside and find that next level of emotional self-reliance, inner security, and rebirth your soul's desire nature, however it is best for you on your evolutionary journey. Thank you, everyone. Good night.